So it's noon, and I'm going to start and kick this off, okay? So, hello everyone, and welcome to Fairfield County SCORE's webinar, The Future of Small Business, What Everyone Needs to Know and What to Do About It. I'm Tim Ryan, a business mentor here at Fairfield County SCORE, and I'll be your host. Our speaker today is Ben Lytle. More on Ben in just a minute. First, let me share some brief info on SCORE. SCORE is funded by a grant from the Small Business Administration, so all of our services are completely free of charge. There are about 300 SCORE offices in the US with over 10,000 volunteers. Fairfield County SCORE is one of the largest and highest rated chapters in the nation, with over 100 volunteers comprising a wide range of expertise. We offer 3 value-added services to small businesses, which are, let me put the screen forward. First, we provide free one-on-one counseling through face-to-face meetings, telephone calls, and Zoom video conferencing. Second, we produce over 100 educational workshops and webinars each year, like this one, on topics of relevance and importance to small businesses. And third, we have extensive resources and tools on our website, including templates to help you build your business plan. So let's get started with today's event. If you have a question during the webinar, please use the chat box located in the lower part of your screen. To respect your time, our webinar will end promptly at 1 o'clock. This session is being recorded, and the link to the recording will be available at fairfieldcounty.score.org within the next couple of days. Now to our speaker. Ben Lytle is the founding CEO of New York Stock Exchange companies Anthem and Acordia, and a futurist. Ben realized a few years ago that most people are unaware of the effect of accelerating change on their lives and careers and the urgent need to prepare. That led to his new book, The Potentialist, Your Future and the New Reality of the Next 30 Years. Ben, it's all yours.
Okay, thank you. We'll go to the first slide if you would then, please. And what I'd like for you, I know we all are pretty well absorbed with daily life. We got plenty to keep us busy, and it seems to get more complicated all the time, and it actually is getting more complicated all the time. But for the next 30, 45 minutes, I'm going to ask you to go up about 50,000 feet and try to observe with me what is taking place in the world and how it's going to change everything we know. More change is going to occur in the next 30 years than certainly in centuries since the beginning of the first industrial revolution in 1760, but it's probably going to be millennia and maybe since the beginning of time. And I know that sounds like hyperbole, but it is not, I promise you. And what's going to happen is we're going to see over the next few decades, the impossible become possible. And it's going to become possible because human potential is going to expand in ways we never anticipated before and which was never possible before. The main 3 takeaways that I want you to if I'm successful in this presentation, you'll walk away with is, first of all, that awareness creates fear or avoids fear. Fear is our enemy here, and we fear the unknown. It's human nature to fear the unknown. We have hunter-gatherer brains, and that's what we do. We're always looking out for that thing that's going to eat us or kill us. So awareness is the first thing, to really be aware of what's going to happen. That's what I'm going to try to do in this short period to the best degree I can. The second is to be pragmatically optimistic, because just like fear causes us to make bad decisions and to freeze up, pessimism blinds us to opportunity. All we can see is the negatives and we don't see the opportunity, and the next few years are going to be full of opportunity. And then finally, taking action, because it's action that's really, really important here, and it's important now. And that's really what I'm selling tonight. Next slide, please. So the first thing we're going to do is address awareness. So what should we be aware of? So let's go to the next slide. And here, what's happening right now is that a new reality is forming. So we look out today and we see the world in a certain way. And the world that we see is changing far faster and in different ways than most of us realize. And it's changing because certain forces are acting on us. And those forces create an effect. They create certain effects, and that shapes then this new reality. An easy way to try to wrap your head around this is, what is the new reality? Well, first of all, we're going to be doing different work. So work is going to shift. Pretty much anything that is repetitious, physically demanding, or physically dangerous in the next 20 to 30 years. Over that time, a lot of those jobs are going to be automated. And what they'll be replaced with is we will be doing higher value work, basically work more fit for humans, which is creative, problem solving, and involving complex human relationships. And the simple reason is those are hard or impossible with today's technology to automate. The other jobs are going to be increasingly easy to automate. The second thing is we're going to have variable lifestyles. We're going to have, you're already seeing it happen with work from anywhere. People are essentially combining what used to be retirement with work. They're traveling and working, and more people are making that choice. And that's just the beginning of the kind of variations in lifestyles that are going to become possible. And most important, and I'll talk more about this, I won't belabor it here, but we ourselves are changing, and particularly young people. If you watch young people today, say under 25, and how they interact with automation, they're really very different than we are already. Their brains are being trained to operate in a way that's difficult for us to quite wrap our head around. And we'll talk more about exactly how we're changing. The other point that I want to make on this slide is that individuals, organizations, and institutions react differently to these changes, to these forces of change. And an organization here is basically, it could be a small company, it could be a not-for-profit, it doesn't matter. It's a group of people having to make decisions and cooperating together. And an institution is something gigantic that has sort of a quasi-legal role, or in some cases a legal role, that we depend on for guidance and stability historically. So that would be like government, education, mass media, healthcare. Those were institutions. And here's the problem, or the challenge, and that we have to be aware of. As individuals, we can make changes overnight. Something new comes up, or a different problem comes up, we make a decision pretty fast. So example, we can and have said, okay, taxis are out, Ubers are in, cable's out, streaming's in, electric car perhaps over a gasoline powered car. We make those decisions pretty fast. As you know, when you've got an organization, you've got constituencies, you can't make decisions that fast, and they slow down. Well, when you get to an institution, they change very, very slowly. And what happens over time as the pace of change picks up is that those institutions and organizations start to have distance between them and the people they serve. And so you see a lot right now. A real easy way for you to check this yourself is can you think of a single institution that's more highly respected, feels more in touch today than it was 10 years ago? And I think if you go through those institutions I mentioned, you'll see that every one of them is struggling. And it's because of this acceleration of change, and they can't keep up with the fact people are changing much faster than they are. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk about what are those forces. Remember, I said there are these forces of change. Well, there's several of them. I only have time to just briefly touch on about 4. One of them is innovation, particularly technological innovation. And these innovations expand human potential and accelerate the capacity for wisdom and maturity. And we'll talk a little bit about how. I'm going to touch on 2 of these just very generally, more what they mean to the everyday person. The universal cloud means that in the next 5 to 10 years, the internet and the cloud will be available to every single person on the planet. Today, there's about 4.5 to 5 billion out of 7.5 billion people who have a smartphone and are already connected. Everyone will be connected within the next few years. And that's the important message of what's going to happen in the cloud. The second one I'm going to touch on is the bottom is security. And security, as we all know, because we've all either been hacked in our home email or our home websites or our businesses, we can't go forward without making significant improvements in security, and those are underway. And there will be changes and new options for how to secure our businesses coming online. They're coming online now, but they're going to pick up steam over the next few years, which is going to give us a better environment. We'll still have hackers, we'll still have security issues, but not at the level we do today. It's going to be much harder for those folks to succeed. The next one I want to talk about is artificial intelligence. And most everybody, of course, you've heard of it, and you may even be highly fluent in what it really means. But I'll tell you, most people aren't. And so the message, the definition I like to give people is as how it will affect you is we're able to develop systems much faster, much cheaper, and the maintenance going forward is much less. That's the bottom line of what it means to business people. And if we had time, I could tell you why exactly that occurs, but it is I came up through IT. I was a CIO before I became Chief Operating Officer and a CEO. And I will tell you, it's magnitudes difference in how fast you can develop systems, how cheap, and how they will require far less maintenance because they learn and they're easily adaptable. The one I want to spend the time on is seamless brain to computer interface. Let's go to the next slide. What's going to happen between now and the next 30 years? Some of the top experts in the field are saying this will occur by 2035, mid 2030s. I can't know for sure. That's what the people most informed seem to be saying. But here's the way to think of this, because this is a huge game changer for how we live and how we think of ourselves. Today, your brain, our brains, what we have between our ears is the most powerful computer known to man. Even today, medicine is just beginning to understand how it works, but there is so much we don't understand yet. So it's an incredibly powerful computer. On the other side, a good way to think about the cloud is it's virtually unlimited computing power, because you can add to it. It's virtually unlimited computing power. Now, connecting those two, so the most powerful brain in the world, computer in the world, our brain, and this incredibly unlimited computing on the other side, what separates us? What separates us today is how fast we can type and how fast we can read a screen. And that's kind of crazy when you think about it. It's kind of senseless. Imagine if we could absorb and react at the speed of which the cloud is able to produce us with images, thoughts, and ideas. That's what's coming. And it's going to come through either voice, that all we need to interact instead of keyboard and a screen is voice control, and more likely ultimately thought. Literally, we think it and we have it. And that's going to be possible, it appears, because of the fact, think of it as I don't think any of us are going to in mass agree to have a chip planted in our brain. Although that's being done today to help people with musculoskeletal issues, but we are likely to consider something like an earpiece we would wear behind our ear, but with the same controls we have with a smartphone. We can turn it on, off, we can mute it, we can do all those things, but that it's tapping directly into our brain so that we can absorb information faster. That is coming. And at the same time, we're going to have more of the automation around us is going to be becoming more human-like. And so as we're able to use it faster, it's able to respond faster and easier. And of course, that drops a barrier for people who maybe aren't terribly literate or not comfortable with automation. Suddenly, if all I have to do is say what I want or think what I want, it's a whole different ballgame. This is a game changer because suddenly we can learn and act based on experience. We can share experience through this kind of a connection. Let's go to the next slide, please. The next big change is demographics. And what's fascinating here is that we have known for 50, well, demographers have known for 50 years that birth rates have been declining and been declining worldwide. 20 years ago, it was well known in academic circles. And in 2004, a friend of mine up in your neighborhood, a fellow named Ben Wattenberg, who had a TV show on PBS up there in the Boston area called Think Tank, wrote a remarkable book called Fewer, F-E-W-E-R. It's still available out on Google. And he predicted that exactly what's happening now is that we are going to have fewer people for sure in the developed world and ultimately worldwide. And his case is because birth rates have been declining and they're pretty substantial. So you have to have 2.1 children per female in a society for population to stay flat. That's the way the numbers work. Today, no developed country has 2.1 birth rate. And in fact, most are below 1.7 or below. And in some places, like the Mediterranean areas of Europe, Greece, Italy, Spain, it's at 1.3 and below. And a few places like South Korea and Japan are even lower. Now, what that means effectively is that race of people, absent something dramatic changing, are going to shrink dramatically in size. And we're seeing it, you know, for a long time, I would try to talk about this for years and advised people in government, you need to be paying attention to this. But I would bet you never saw you've never seen a single politician ever mention this is a concern, and you've never heard about it on national media. And I'm not sure why, but the fact is now it's very real. We suddenly see that there's not enough pilots. And hey, guess what? 100 flights were canceled by American. Now 100 flights were canceled by Southwest. And that's just, it's not isolated to pilots. We have a growing shortage of physicians in almost every specialty. You may have noticed if you've needed to see a specialist anytime recently, that it takes maybe a couple of months to see someone. And then you very likely are going to have to go through a gatekeeper, a physician's assistant, before you ever see that specialist. And that's just one area of where we're starting to see declines in population. This has real relevance for those of you who are business operators, because it's going to get harder and harder to find people. The things you're likely seeing right now, that it's more difficult to recruit, more difficult to find the kind of people you want, that's not going to change. And in fact, it's going to accelerate. It's not in the long term, though, necessarily a negative outcome. It simply means, for example, for the environment, the fewer people means less of an imprint. But it does say we have to adapt our economies. You know, nobody's real sure how do you make an economy grow when there's fewer people. And we're also going to have an aging population. But there's good things that come out of that aging as well, which I'll discuss later. But the main thing to remember is we're going to live longer, maybe 20, 30 to 40 years longer. As life extends, the stages of life extend. just like stretching a rubber band. And so, for example, you can already witness young people seem to grow up slower. They get married later, they have children later, and they have fewer children. As you get fewer people, then you have and you have people living longer, you have a naturally aging population. And ultimately population declines in total. And so for the country, that's a challenge. How are we going to finance more people living longer? And that's one of the reasons it's going to be more important than ever for people to take good care of their health, because they're going to live 20 or 30 years longer. It's going to be one of the reasons why it's going to be more important for people to really plan their wealth and manage it better than we have historically, because they're going to have to finance those extra years. And very likely as employers, you're going to have to turn to people that are older for your workforce, because you're simply not going to have enough younger people available. Next slide, please. This next slide is difficult to read, and I'm obviously not going to get into it, but it's worth your time to take. It's not my slide. It's written by, or was done by a fellow named Muehlhauser. It's really a fascinating slide, though. And what he does is he takes these items on the left, like life expectancy, GDP per person, living, percent of people not living in extreme poverty, so forth and so on. And those are measures he creates for sort of the quality of life, or the sophistication of life. And what's fascinating is if you see how he tracks that over time, a lot of really big things happen that in the end didn't move the bar that much. Like the Black Death, where we had a 10% population loss, or the Mongol invasion, about the same thing, or the Renaissance. What causes the life to change dramatically is, if you'll see out there, the marking points in the late 1700s, and that's the first industrial revolution. And since then, we've had two others, and we're in the fourth now. And what happens with change over time, and how it affects human beings, is that it's not trends that really change it. It's the convergence of trends. So you're hearing me talk about these forces of change. And I've talked about innovation, particularly technological innovation, talked about changing demographics, and now I'm talking about accelerating change. When those things converge, you get this acceleration of change. And that acceleration of change is what we have to adapt to as human beings. And we're not very well prepared for it. And particularly this time, because more change is going to occur much faster. Next slide, please. The last force I'm going to talk about is distance. And the only point, the main point here is that distance is just, it's going to matter less. It already does matter less than it did 10 years ago. And when you think about it, there's two major things changing it. First of all, is we're creating virtual environments in which it's more like being together. And that's opening our ability to have relationships, business relationships, personal relationships, anywhere in the world. And remember, we're talking about technology we have today. Imagine what it's going to be 10 years from now. Because we're having a conversation right now on Zoom version 1 virtually. Imagine Zoom 10 years from now. Imagine these kinds of devices 10 years from now. Imagine how real we'll be able to have it. But also physical, we're addressing physical travel. Most of it isn't real yet. It's not available to the public yet, but it's coming. And I've listed some of the things there that are going to be the kinds of things that are going to make physical travel faster, cheaper, and safer. And at the same time, our ability to not travel at all through virtual is also going to increase, which the net result of that means we can think about businesses that are worldwide that we never could have before. We can think about relationships with people around the world. And over time, we'll also be addressing the fact that language translation will get so good that it will no longer be a barrier, and we'll have things to help prompt us on cultural differences particularly when we're working in the cloud. Next slide, please. The effects. Now, I talked about those four changing forces, and obviously there are more forces than four. I've talked about the four that I think are the most important. The same thing's true of effects. I've only picked out a handful, but they're the kinds of things that are going to be so significant that becoming aware of them now and thinking about how they might affect your life and your business is worth your time. The first is expanded human potential and wisdom. And I have an entire presentation simply on that. And here's what can change that. With the very technologies I talked about up there at the beginning, the cloud, increased security, artificial intelligence, and this brain-to-computer interface where all we have to do is think it or speak it, and we get what we need. We're going to be able to basically accelerate and democratize learning and wisdom. Now, think about this for a minute. What if every person in the world had access to the same quality of education that a person who lives near you does? Exactly the same. Whether they live in the Saharan desert or whether they live in the Brazilian rainforest, and regardless of what their language or background is, they have the same potential to learn, and to the equivalent of today getting a degree. Whatever it is they need to learn, they could learn it in the way they learn in their language. That's absolutely possible, and it's coming. And it'll revolutionize the world because suddenly that's no longer a barrier for people to become entrepreneurs, to become successful on their own. The second major thing that will change, and the same is true for wisdom. Wisdom can be taught. Maturity can be accelerated through coaching, through mentors, and that's going to become, and through education, and that's going to become available worldwide, just like learning. The other thing that's going to make a big difference is that, and for this, we don't have to do anything, and we will get an expansion of wisdom in the world. And so here's how it works. We're likely, people who are under 50 are likely to live an extra 10, 20 years, maybe more. That whole field of longevity is really hard to predict right now, but it's going to get longer. And if you have any doubts, it took us 120 years to double life expectancy. So in the last 120, we've doubled life expectancy. Hardly anybody who knows anything at all about this field expects us to do less than doubling it again, but this time in 60 years. That's why we're going to see an expansion, continuing extension of human life, despite peaks like we've had with COVID. I mean, despite incidents, the long-term trend is for longer life. So people live longer. From my experience, and I suspect it's likely yours as well, people are sort of at their peak of wisdom and maturity and good decision making from about 45 to around 70 today. And it's getting longer. People are staying wise and active and mature every year, it seems like, later in life. But let's say that period, is on the whole about 20, 25 years or so today, where they're absolutely at their peak. They know who they are. They're wise in the ways of the world. They really don't care what anybody thinks, and they want to give back as a general rule. Now, with an aging, now imagine they have 20 more years. So now imagine that 20 or 25 years today we get from those people is now 40 years, 30 years, or 40 years, or 50 years. That in and of itself is dramatic. But now imagine at the same time, because of declining birth rates, we have a bigger share of the population are older. So now a bigger share of the population is older, wiser than mature. That's going to have an impact. Second thing, mortality is going to get vague. It's pretty clear today, and it's going to get more shaded than that through medical science and through some of the technological options. You've probably already seen that there is the ability to digitize your life and save it for people in the future to study you and to know how you lived. That's coming and will move, I think, over the next few years from being sort of a niche thought to something that virtually everyone does. And that's just the beginning of a way to sort of make mortality a little vague. Medicine is also going to suddenly provide choices we don't have today. The big one for all of you who are in business is that what's occurring right now is we are exiting the industrial age. Now, we tend to think, oh, well, the industrial age, that was factories and, so forth and so on. And we're different today. Not really. We're still in industrial age largely in the way we think about work, in the way we think about careers, retirement, these very defined periods, lifestyles, and even what a corporation is or what a company is going to be. I would invite you and encourage you to really challenge that. Work I've already defined as how it's going to be very, very different. Our careers are going to come and go faster as we figure out, as we automate things, but that's not necessarily a negative if we're putting people into a higher quality of work, where they can make a bigger impact on the world and the work's more meaningful for them. Retirement. People are not really retiring anymore, not the way they used to. People are doing what I call in my book refinement. They want freedom. They want the freedom to do what they want to do and live the way they want to live. But all of them still want to work and contribute in some way. So this is something that's very much should be on the front of your mind as a business leader. And where we're headed to is everything is customized. Everything's personalized. We already experience it in our streaming choices on what we want to watch. It knows, as soon as we turn the TV on, it knows what we like, and it offers us lots of choices. If you own a Tesla, that car is being customized to you. And we're getting used to that idea of things being personalized. And one of the great things about the technologies that are coming, particularly artificial intelligence, is it gives us the ability to personalize en masse. So we can manage personalized individual choices for every person and every customer. And then the last one is what I mentioned about individuals ascending and institutions declining with resistance, is the fact that we are adapting faster today than our institutions can keep up with us. And you probably noticed that they seem regressive. They don't seem as relevant. And that split's going to get worse, and that's not going to be a pleasant period. It's going to make us very uncomfortable. I suspect we all already are. Next slide, please. So what do we do? What should you be thinking about as a business person? Let's go to the next slide. I'm not going to read this. I'll let you read it later. But essentially, Alvin Toffler, in his book Future Shock in 1970, laid out exactly what's happening right now. And what he basically talked about is what we're calling deinstitutionalization here. These that our institutions are struggling, and we have to kind of reinvent them. But also that we have, because change is going to be so fast, we're going to have to learn, unlearn, and relearn over and over again. So if you're under 50 or if you have children under 30, this is going to be their life. Multiple careers, multiple jobs, and constant relearning and retraining. So the idea that we go to school until we're 27, then we're all done, is just not going to be the case anymore. Next slide, please. For you, where you need to be as equipped and as thorough in your understanding about what's going on here with these forces than as I am. And that's a lot of why I wrote the book, is to try to provide an easy handbook to follow so that you can really wrap your head around this and see how to impact it in your daily life, particularly as a business leader. So here's what democratization means, is that a lot of the technologies and innovations are making something that's now available to a few people available to many, and ultimately to everyone. And you can quickly relate to democratizing innovations if you think about the printing press, if you think about the internet, if you think about the smartphone. And we're going to see more and more of that. And what happens is when we have an innovation, a democratizing innovation, it triggers others. So for example, the internet, think about how many different innovations have been spawned by the internet or the smartphone. And we're going to see more and more of that. So that means we're going to have a lot more innovation going on around us, a lot more things to learn. Life gets more complicated. And then I've already talked about how that causes organizations to have to respond. If you don't respond, your customer and you become distanced because they're adapting faster than you. And so for each business person, you need to be thinking about what would my industry look like totally democratized? An easy one to wrap your head around as a way to think about this is retail. The ultimate democratization of retail is 3D printing, meaning the customer designs the product, the customer prints the product in their back room or at the local UPS store, and there's nobody else in between. That's full democratization of retail. Obviously won't be everything, but it gives you a picture of what every single industry is going to face, because that's where things are headed. And there are a lot of innovators out there going to try to make this happen. Next slide, please. I don't have time to cover all of these, but take time to study this. And in the book, it talks about each one of these. Democratization has certain characteristics. And you today as a business leader need to be thinking about how would I change my business to utilize each one of these characteristics more. You do that, you're going to be way ahead of the game. Next slide, please. And then the real thing for leaders today is to start phasing out the industrial age. Really focus on the fact that we've got a declining aging population. It's not a trend that's going to change suddenly. It maybe won't change at all for a long time. It's until it stabilizes, and we don't know where the stabilization is. An important thing, not one single country yet has been able to reverse this decline in birth rates. When you have fewer people to competing for jobs, they have the upper hand, as will your customers. And so in the industrial age, you have the benefit of being an employer. You say, well, if you don't want the job, there's 5 people behind you who do. That's not going to be the case anymore. And you're going to have to think about, okay, how do I build a much more loyal workforce than I do today? You're going to have to think about these expanding life stages, and younger people are going to be a little less mature than you would like them. They're not going to be the 25-year-old you were, perhaps. And that's going to affect you some in your hiring. On the other hand, older workers are going to be more eager to work. And so you will be able to likely recruit older workers where today it may be, maybe you don't even attempt to do it. And you'll also have to consider training unskilled workers, or finding companies who will do that bridge for you, so that people today you wouldn't necessarily consider hiring into your company, you might if they were given the right skills. And then finally, on accelerating change, you're just going to have to be able to react a lot quicker. Expect the institutions to be more turbulent, less reliable. Utilize the technologies that I talked about at the beginning to address the very problems you're facing in management, and be ready to work with people in a lot of different, more varied relationships than you've had in the past. It's simply going to be necessary to get the people you need. I think the only other thing I want to mention is the cliff effect, and what that means is in a time when change is accelerating, when life is changing in many different ways, so much that it's hard to keep up with it. It's real easy to miss something that's really, really important until it's on you. And you can't count on government or media or somebody to say, hey, you need to pay attention to this. Perfect example is this aging population issue. Nobody was talking about it. Now it's on us. Now we don't have enough doctors. Now we don't have enough pilots. And we're gonna run across every profession like that. Okay, next slide, please. The last thing I want to focus on in my last few minutes is the importance of being pragmatically optimistic instead of being pessimistic. As I've said, when you're pessimistic, you miss opportunity. The real risk here, though, is our children. We forget that the vast majority of our children's attitudes about the future, they take from us as parents and grandparents. And sometimes our hunter-gatherer brains get going and we get together, you've experienced it, and suddenly we're all talking about negative, how bad things are. And we may think, oh, that's no problem, you know, we're just talking. Well, maybe the child sitting in the other room's just listening. And let me give you a real life example of this. Next slide, please. In 1966, the British Broadcasting Company did a series of interviews with young people. And they asked them, what's life going to be like in the year 2000? And so I'm just going to quickly walk through these. You can actually find this out on YouTube. But first, this young woman says, well, we're going to freeze because the sun's going to burn out and we might have another ice age. Well, that hadn't happened. Next slide, please. This young lady says, well, we're going to have so many people, they'll just be overflowing into the sea. And it turns out we have the exact opposite problem. Next one, please. This young man says, oh, I'm not looking forward. It's going to be in such a horrible time. It's already horrible. Imagine how horrible it's going to be in 40 years. Now, if you go and watch this YouTube, two things strike you. First of all, because there's, I think, maybe 8 or 10 of these kids they interview. The first thing is everything they predicted was wrong. And usually 100% wrong. So where did these are kids? Where did they get these attitudes? Well, you know where they got them. They got them from their parents, primarily, and from the media. And you could say, well, okay, well, that was 1966, and you know, people weren't as sophisticated, and these are the Brits after all, and they're hardly a cheery bunch. So maybe that's just, you know, maybe that's just an oddity. Next slide, please. Look at this young woman's face. This is a 2022 TikTok. And look what she says. More and more of our generation are choosing to be child-free because we can't afford it. And we can't stomach to think bringing a child into this awful world. It's so wrong. You know, and I know by any measure, we live in the best time in history. Will there always be adversity? Absolutely. But this is the best time in history, not the worst. And then look at the bottom. This thing got 116,500 likes. And we all, if you listen closely, you'll find young people saying that. No, I'm not going to have any children at the very time we need them to have children. So that's our challenge. And you know, when we have the second highest cause of death of people aged 26 to 34 is suicide. When we have a recent national news poll, 70% of the people responding to that poll said that they thought the future would be worse than today, and those people are talking to their kids. And then a recent a survey of 19 to 25-year-olds found that only 10% were confident in the future. So we got our job cut out for us, but that's something every one of us can do. As a parent and grandparent, we can sit down to our kids right now and say, hey, you got to remember what you hear on the media is not reality. And we are a 3 million-year-old species. We've overcome a lot in the past. Today, by any measure, is nothing compared to what we faced in the past. You need to believe in the future. That is, I think, one of our most important jobs. And it's one of the reasons I wrote this book. Next slide, please. Our job is to make these kids the greatest generation since World War II, because if you think about the power they're going to have with these technological changes and living longer, what good they could do if they're properly motivated. That's our job. Next slide. And I won't have time to cover it here, but it is in the book. Essentially, what we have to do is make people, change people's perspective, make them aware of the arc of history, make them aware of where we are, why the world's changing like it is. Pragmatic optimism means my case is better than your case. My case is better than the pessimist case. And I hope you accept that case. And that is that we are 3 million years old. And this is the best time in history. And yes, we've got problems, but look how far we've come, and we'll do it again. Becoming much more resilient, having a bias for action, recognizing that adversity and challenge is part of life. That's what makes us stronger. Same thing that keeps plants and animals strong. And so that's just part of life. And then certain life skills that have always been important are going to be more important than ever in the next 30 years. And in my book, I spell out these 7, which were carefully selected with groups of focus groups, that these are the 7 things that if you didn't do anything else, do these 7 and you'll be way ahead. Next slide, please. And that's it. And that's what my book's about. That's what the cover's about, is that we are in a period in which we're going to see a significant evolution of human beings and an expansion of human capacity. And what I try to do and encourage people to think about is that each day, all we can do, each of us, is to do our best, to be our best, and leave the world and the people we meet a little better. If we all do that, it's going to be a much better place. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
And thank you, Ben. That was great. I'm already feeling a little bit more optimistic. We're going to use our remaining time to address any questions. We'll take as many questions as we can, so you can submit them via the chat feature in the lower part of your screen. Or it looks like we have a few that came in through the Q&A section. Let's see. Are others deeply concerned about the dehumanizing, dangerous control and implications of humanity with no privacy? I guess that's a question we all face.
Yeah, excuse me. And I do think we're probably at the peak of that today. The security that's being discussed for Web3, meaning the innovations that are systems being built going forward. And I am leading a startup company, and we are very much building in this way, is that users own the data. Excuse me. We all made a bad deal. We didn't know we were making a bad deal, but Google was free. Hey, great. Facebook, hey, it's free. Great. But none of us read the fine print enough or really understood the implications when it said, but we can use your data in a way we want to. We probably wouldn't make that same deal today. And if someone came along with an alternative that said, okay, well, which like DuckDuckGo does, which says we don't share your data, period. Or a new Facebook model came out that said, okay, this is going to cost you $5 a month, but your data is your data. That's where we're headed, I think. And so I think we're at the peak of it. On those life skills, though, one of the things that at the top was brand. And one of the things that I'm trying to teach young people in that book, and really all of us, is that you have to imagine that we are now in a transparent world. And so just like in the past, you didn't walk into a room and look sloppy for a job interview. You have to think about everything I put out on the web is everyone in the world can theoretically see it. And so go in it with that mindset and manage your privacy personally. Don't trust someone else to manage it for you.
Right. Someone is saying that with decreased employment opportunities, people need meaning and purpose in their life. And if they're getting less, could crime possibly increase as opposed to declining?
It could, and I'm not predicting a decline in crime. I think that we can expect there's a certain percentage of the population, nature loves diversity. And so in a bell curve, there will always be people who seek to take advantage of others. There's some data that says that number hasn't changed much over time, that it's pretty well balanced. Just like on the other side, there's about 10 or 15% of the population that are the most magnanimous people in the world, and we all admire them and want to be more like them. And so it's something of a balance in nature. So I expect we'll always have criminals. What we can hope is that the same thing there will happen that's pretty much happening slowly in warfare, which is that it becomes less violent over time and becomes much more cyber crime and other kind of crimes. So I don't know where that'll go, but I don't think we're going to see a reduction in crime, nor do I see a reason why there would be a dramatic increase, particularly if we can address poverty and opportunity through some of the technologies we have.
Right. The other comment is that with all this mechanization, increasing energy use, which increasing energy usage is a huge problem causing global warming and increasing in radiation.
Right.
You think that'll cause serious health problems?
Yeah, and I'm not an energy specialist, but I do think that the best indicator there is a flattening and declining of the total population, because at the end of the day, it's per person use. The other is, big users of energy. Some of the big users of energy are agriculture and also just movement. And if those advances happen in transportation or in distance that I had on that earlier slide, I think those will start to cut into use. It's very interesting. I have a grandson who is one of the one of the Tesla beta drivers for the self-driving car. And he said, I had to be a good driver to get into that thing. And so I was already a pretty conservative driver. He said, but the self-drive, I watch my energy use and it's down 15%. And I found that striking. I don't know that that's representative. That's one story, but that's where we're trying to get to. And so I do think we'll ultimately both find better forms of energy, and we will ultimately innovate to figure out how to use the energy we have better. And then a declining population will help that.
Right. Another individual is concerned about the privacy issue, with all this interface, human to computers, I guess. Do you have similar concerns for privacy?
Yeah, although I will say, like I said, if you follow it all, what's happening with blockchain and with even the next step beyond blockchain, of essentially your data is not only on any single server anywhere. It gets harder. There will always be people trying to bust through this, but it starts to get there's a whole different level of security compared to what we're used to today. And I'm talking about magnitudes stronger than what we're used to today. It's going to take several years, though, to put that in place, because we built all these systems that were really pretty fragile. When the internet came out, we built the cloud. Nobody really understood that we were democratizing not just good people, but we were democratizing scammers and thieves, and they got the same access through the internet. And they did. They came right into our homes and right into our business and commercial systems. So we now got to go back and rebuild those. But the technology that I've seen is light years ahead of any security we've got today. And it is being built. Like I said, the company I'm leading, we're building that into our product.
Right. One individual is commenting that they wish this type of teaching was done at the middle school level. I mean, if you have seen anything like this getting down to the middle school?
Yeah, I have spoken to school groups, and I will speak anywhere on this subject. What I'd love to do is for all of you who are attending, you become capable. You can walk in and you can read this book and you can give that presentation as good as I can. So I would love to see you do that. It is important in middle school because these kids are going to have to make decisions none of us ever had to make before. I'll give you one example. How do I make decisions when everything I see and everything I hear can be false? How do I do that? We had places we could trust. Now it's not so easy. They're going to have to figure out how to do that. If I can live 20 or 30 years longer, do I want to? What's going to make that decision for me? What if it takes extra money? Where am I going to come from? Those are real decisions these kids are going to face. If I go through maybe 5, 10, 15 different careers in my longer life, how do I finance those periods where I'm transitioning? How am I going to do that? Those are decisions these kids are going to face. And we need to be helping them get there. That's the exact reason I wrote this book, because I realized I hadn't done it with my own children and grandchildren. So that's what caused me to write the book. And I hope you'll take it. You'll take this seriously and at least take it up with your family. If you can cause a situation in a school, if I'm where I can, I'll speak to the school. I don't care. I'm happy to just get the message out, but I hope all of you will become well equipped at speaking to this as well.
Yeah, someone else wanted you to clarify the comment on birth rate. Can you please clarify the ratio? Was it every 1.3 people? Just clarify the ratio of 2.1.
Yeah, and I'm sorry to have to go through that so fast. And there are a couple of things I would encourage you to do. One is get that book. Like I said, it's out of print, but there's still copies out there called Fewer by Ben Wattenberg. And you read that, you will be really well equipped to understand what's going on. This data is also out on the internet. But essentially what it means, you have to have 2.1 births per female in a population to keep the population flat. No country, no developed country today has a 2.1 birth rate. Most are far below. Since I've been watching the United States, we've gone from 1.9 to 1.7, and that's with the benefit of immigration. I'm not sure where we would be without it. And we have countries that are in free fall. One of them might surprise you is China. One of the reasons China is perhaps more dangerous today than ever is that they built an economy off of cheap labor, and now that labor's not there anymore. And they have one of the fastest declining birth rates and aging populations. So they've got a real crisis. And so do several countries around the world. It can be managed, but you have to start managing it right away. So for example, if we would have been paying attention, we would have been increasing the number of people into medical school years past to make sure we had enough doctors. We would have been making sure that we had plenty of more pilots in training. Now everyone's scrambling. So the lesson for you is don't let that happen to you. You know, look at your company and say, okay, how am I going to replace people? You know, Fred over there is going to tell me he's going to retire in 5 years. How am I going to, or 2 years, how am I going to replace him? Can I convince him to stay on a little longer? That's the kind of thinking where it becomes very real for everybody today.
Very good. Oh, that's all the time we have for questions. Again, SCORE offers free individual mentoring. So please use the link on the screen there to get more information on that. You're going to receive an evaluation via the email today's webinar. We'd appreciate it if you would fill it out for us. Tell us what you liked or didn't like so we could improve our program in the future. For information about other SCORE webinars and workshops, please visit our calendar on our website at fairfieldcounty.score.org. In closing, a big thank you to Ben Lytle for today's presentation.
Thank you.
Have a great rest of your day, everybody.